Shock! A sudden strike on Russia in the center of Bishkek. In Kyrgyzstan, a hunt for Russians has begun. A sensational arrest with a one-day difference. Coincidence or a signal to Moscow? The special services are acting tough and Moscow is bewildered. Who is next on the list and what message is Bishkek trying to send to Putin? Watch.
The Kyrgyzstan Special Services have detained Natalia Severina, an employee of the Russian House. She is suspected of recruiting, financing, and training mercenaries for the war in Ukraine.
How often do we think about how to behave when detained by officials? Where is the fine line between respecting human rights, abuse of authority, and torture? Let's figure it out together.
A certain Viktor Vasilyev, who calls himself a political scientist, but is actually a GRU officer, was detained on the same charges. He also attempted to carry out sabotage in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion.
We can only hope for the prudence of the Kyrgyz Republic, which has been and remains an ally of Russia for a long time. Participation in a military political alliance with Russia through the CSTO, cooperation with Russia, can serve as a guarantor of security and stable further development of the Kyrgyz Republic.
The main recruitment method was luring people by offering Russian citizenship. This applied to everyone and primarily, of course, to those migrants who came to work.
And of course, in Russia, they are outraged that their so-called allies are imprisoning the so-called veterans of the special military operation.
Well, actually, the courts of Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan are issuing rulings against people who participated in the special military operation. They are being imprisoned for very long terms, like 8 to 10 years as mercenaries, yes. And they make no allowances for the fact that in our country, participants of the special military operation are considered heroes.
Putin is weakening. And at the same time, we understand that in Kyrgyzstan, not only Russia has influence. Yes, then perhaps yet China and Turkey have no less yet, if not more, influence. And in fact, today the authorities can quite possibly listen to China and Turkey much more attentively than to Russia.
Even the fact that Putin spent several days in Kyrgyzstan a year ago didn't help. He promised gas, asked for military cooperation, and awarded the president for his merits.
I am very glad to be in Kyrgyzstan.
Relations between Russia and Kyrgyzstan are heating up after a raid by Russian security forces in a bathhouse where Kyrgyz people were relaxing. The so-called law enforcement officers mocked the detainees. They beat them with batons and stun guns, forced them to crawl on their knees.
Have you seen the attitude towards Kyrgyz people in Russia? Ordinary drivers, cooks were in the bathhouse. The security forces came, beat them without reason, forced them to eat hot peppers, made them crawl. Why? Because they said, "We don't like you." They are mocking them. What was the reaction?
I would say that a convenient pretext emerged, which became quite loud and to which the official authorities could not fail to respond. Since the story in the bathhouse really gained traction and became quite well known among the general public, they had to respond to it somehow.
This is not the first situation involving the humiliation of Kyrgyz people in Russia. On federal channels, they were never considered as people.
Then within the Kazakh SSR, they created the Kyrgyz ASSR, and later they took it out and separated it from the RSFSR. That is, decisions about the formation of nations were made so arbitrarily. For example, Uzbeks never existed before the revolution. There was no such ethnic name. They took and created it from several Central Asian peoples.
Among ordinary Russians, they are considered second class. For instance, a passenger hits a Kyrgyz taxi driver because he prohibited drinking alcohol in the car. The police refused to initiate a criminal case. Representatives of the Russian elite did not remain silent about the situation either. Deputies Kabanov and Nostanina, in the best chauvinistic traditions, decided to put the Kyrgyz in their place.
Doesn't it seem that it's long overdue to put the overly arrogant and completely insolent Kyrgyz side in their place? The majority of Russian citizens are confident and waiting for Russia to finally remind the forgetful Kyrgyz comrades who the superpower is here.
I will speak not as an official, but as a citizen of Russia. All of this reeks of black ingratitude and betrayal. I hope the initiators of the arrests of people associated with the Russian House will bitterly regret their step, as will all those who underestimated Russia and thought they could do anything.
Well, Russia doesn't currently have the means to, so to speak, strangle Kyrgyzstan, allowing them to behave so freely and directly threaten the country. As we understand, from the perspective of labor resources, Russia is heavily dependent on labor migrants today, primarily because a lot of people are indeed involved in the war. And naturally, these people who are taken out of the economy for the war need to be replaced by someone.
No matter how much you shout about your greatness, sooner or later you have to admit that because of the war it started, Russia is heading towards ruin. And those whom the Russians have oppressed for decades are now raising their heads higher. A defeat in the sky. The Ukrainian naval drone Magura has rewritten history. What the GUR operatives did, no one has done before. The Russian army has never faced such disgrace before. The armed forces of Ukraine delivered a humiliating blow to the very heart of the Kremlin's greatness. A legendary operation that the whole world is already talking about. All the details are coming up.
No one had done this before them. For the first time in history, Ukraine shot down a military aircraft with a naval drone. Our GUR confirmed the destruction and published this video as proof.
This, by the way, is not the first instance of the destruction of Russian aviation. But before this, it was helicopters.
A day later, some details began to emerge. In particular, the head of the GUR, Kirilo Budanov, clarified in an interview with the Warzone that 3 unmanned Magura V-7 boats participated in the attack, 2 of which fired at the planes. In the process, 2 Russian Su-30SM attack aircraft were destroyed. One of the crews perished, while the other managed to eject. The Russians immediately sent a civilian vessel for him, hoping that Ukraine would not violate the rules of war and fire upon civilians.
Despite the fact that the Ukrainians had numerous opportunities to destroy this civilian cargo ship along with the Russian military crew, they did not take advantage of it. They saw how the crew was being evacuated. They circled around the crew, who were struggling in the water. Nevertheless, they did not fire a single shot at either the cargo ship or the crew.
Also, it seems that the situation has become clearer regarding which missiles the Ukrainian Magurs were firing. In particular, a photo of a sea drone equipped with an American AM-9 air-to-air missile appeared online. Previous versions of the Bayraktar were armed with Soviet IR-73 missiles.
What is its uniqueness? What is its uniqueness? Well, indeed, it's in the fact that its surface remote control system, specifically remote, which is very important, managed to shoot down a manned object. And if we talk about the cost of the Magur, which is around 250 NAS to $300,000, and the cost of the Russian Su-30, which is $40 to $50 million, you can calculate how many times cheaper it means destroyed an expensive one.
Meanwhile, analysts are divided. The issue here is not even about the money, although the Kremlin repeatedly faces problems with it as well. The main issue is the technologies and production capacities, which in Russia are either lost or in huge deficit due to Western sanctions.
Each Su-30SM aircraft is worth its weight in gold. It's about the components. They are difficult to procure bypassing the sanctions. Moreover, as far as I know, Su-30SMs are either not being produced at all or are barely being produced.
Besides the obvious result of destroying Russian aircraft, this attack also brought another advantage to the Ukrainian armed forces. The enemy is not completely subdued, but they are definitely in a state of terror. Having lost 2 colleagues, and apparently hearing about 2 more who unexpectedly ended up in the Black Sea, one can only imagine the mood with which they will now embark on missions, in the Black Sea area.
The crews of Russian aircraft flying over the Black Sea area now understand that they no longer have the assurance of safety. Even if they don't see our weapons, they see their targeting radars, which doesn't mean that these weapons aren't there. And these weapons, these samples of armaments, have precisely targeted their aircraft.
It's not easier, by the way, for the pilot's command either, because even if the radars detect Ukrainian Magurs, it will no longer be followed by an unequivocal command to launch the aircraft. Since the leadership of the Russian Air Forces now understands, it's far from certain that the next pilots will manage to come out unscathed.
Every time the Ukrainians launch an operation in the Black Sea, it presents Russia with a difficult choice of what to lose. Oil and gas platforms, or let's say, some other rigs in the Black Sea. Or for instance, their assets in Crimea. Because these unmanned boats can also be accompanied by drones. In other words, they are like mini aircraft carriers. Or perhaps they might have to lose another helicopter or a Su-30SM.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Read more about resonant events on the Times of Ukraine Telegram channel. Only fresh news and verified information. Link in the description below the video. We told you about the unique operation involving the downing of a Russian military plane. But that's not all. Hellish battles, hundreds of powerful explosions. That's how the situation on the front can be described. The Ukrainian armed forces steamrolled over the Russians, and the victory parade has turned into a parade of paranoia. In Moscow, an emergency. On May 9th, communication and internet are being shut down. Will the Ukrainian armed forces strike Red Square on May 9th? We are telling you right now.
An unprecedented incident occurred in the Black Sea waters. For the first time in the history of world wars, a naval drone destroyed not one, but two enemy fighters at once. These were Russian Su-30s that were attempting to counter Ukrainian naval drones. However, instead of being the hunters, they became the prey. This strike marked a real breakthrough in the field of asymmetric warfare. Previously, unmanned platforms had only managed to shoot down helicopters. Specifically, the Ukrainian forces had already accounted for two Mi-8s destroyed in similar operations. But for the first time, a naval drone targeted combat aviation. According to available data, one of the enemy Su-30s was shot down near the port of Novorossiysk, where operatives from the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine were operating in close coordination with the SBU and the defense forces. The fighter jet was hit by a missile launched from the Magura naval unmanned platform. These drones have repeatedly inflicted significant losses on the Russian fleet. The Russians could not hide the scale of the failure. Mentions of luring began to appear in pro-Russian Telegram channels. This is how they describe the Ukrainian tactic, where drones approach the target, provoking aviation to take off. At that moment, precise strikes were delivered on the aircraft. In fact, Ukrainian sea drones have become not only a means of attack, but also a trap. This case once again emphasizes that the Russian army, despite all claims of full control over the maritime space, has lost the initiative even at its own bases. Ukrainian drones are no longer just breaking through to coastal infrastructure, they are effectively destroying aerial targets, changing the rules of the game at sea. The Russian authorities once again demonstrate that even Victory Day can be held in bunker mode and electronic warfare. On May 9th, the Kremlin announced a ceremonial military parade in Moscow. However, the preparations for it resemble an evacuation more than a celebration. The festive initiative turned out to be so attractive and safe that all the foreign guests who were planned to be invited suddenly fell ill en masse. Not a single leader from friendly countries dared to take the risk, even for the red carpet at the Kremlin walls. Meanwhile, the military equipment that was supposed to be showcased at the parade was hastily covered with camouflage nets. The problem was that there weren't enough nets, and some equipment had to be literally covered with patches. The most indicative step is the decision to activate electronic warfare systems in the city for the entire day of the parade. Because of this, an official warning was issued in Moscow: there will be no mobile connection. The formal explanation is as follows: due to the holding of festive events. Exactly how the internet interferes with the celebration is not specified. The culmination was the speech by Press Secretary Peskov saying that President Putin will not be able to personally attend the parade this year due to a busy schedule, so he will join via video link. It is obvious that a busy schedule is a synonym for the word fear. After all, a parade where even the Supreme Commander-in-Chief does not dare to appear in person looks more like a target than a celebration. And the real reason seems obvious: fear of drones, which have already flown deep into Russian territory more than once. And now even Russia's main propaganda show, the Victory Parade, is turning into a parade of paranoia. Meanwhile, the operators of the strike drones from the Phoenix unit reported another successful week of operations on the front line. In the past 7 days, the fighters managed to destroy a significant amount of Russian equipment and personnel, inflicting substantial losses on the enemy. In particular, during the execution of combat missions, they destroyed Tor M2 anti-aircraft missile systems, 2 M-Star-S self-propelled artillery units, 3 tanks, 30mm guns, 17 military trucks, and 3 passenger cars used by the occupiers. These targets were hit using FPV drones, guided drops, and other means that the Phoenix units effectively utilize in the combat zone. Thus, in just 1 week, the enemy lost equipment comparable in armament to several companies. The striking work of Phoenix once again proves air control and precise targeting are the key to destroying enemy resources without direct confrontation. Airborne operations at their peak. Results of the 3rd Battalion for April. The soldiers of the 3rd Airborne Assault Battalion of the 79th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade continue to destroy the enemy daily, demonstrating skill and coordinated work while carrying out combat missions in the Donetsk region. In April 2025, the unit inflicted significant losses on the occupiers by carrying out precise and effective airstrikes, primarily using strike UAVs. Every destroyed tank, truck, or bunker is not just a technical target, but a reduction in the combat capabilities of the Russian army. Currently, the battalion is performing extremely challenging tasks in defending the settlement of Constantinople in the Donetsk region. This direction remains one of the hottest on the front line, and it is there that the paratroopers consistently demonstrate their endurance, determination, and professionalism. While the enemy attempts to advance, Ukrainian paratroopers continue to methodically drive them out of fortifications, destroying enemy resources and holding the defensive line. The Pokrovsky direction is the hottest section of the front amid constant massive assaults. Up to 100 attacks occur here daily. The Russians are strengthening logistics and engineering cover. In particular, near the village of Kalivka on the E50 highway, the enemy is building tunnels, from nets to protect equipment from FPV drones. These engineering structures allow for the supply of offensive groups in the direction of Selidov and Novohrodivka, key strongholds of the offensive. This indicates long-term preparation to maintain pressure in this direction. The enemy is trying to stabilize the rear and reduce the vulnerability of logistical routes. In the Kupiansk direction, preparations for a new offensive are underway. Russia is preparing for a summer escalation precisely here. The likely goal is to reach the Oskil River on the R79 highway, which opens a direct path to Kupiansk. However, the situation remains difficult for the enemy. The Ukrainian armed forces destroyed pontoons with artillery and drones, which halted the mass transfer of equipment. Fighting continues in the groves and open fields. The advancement is minimal. The enemy has started using fishing nets, which form corridors for equipment. They are less explosive for FPV drones compared to regular chain-link fencing. Russia is trying to find a solution for anti-drone defense ahead of a possible summer offensive. However, the Ukrainian armed forces are successfully disrupting enemy logistics at crossings and supply routes. The strategic picture is as follows. There is an anticipation of summer escalation in both directions, in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. Active preparations for the offensive are being recorded, including massive attacks, engineering structures, and protection of logistical chains. Analysts predict that in the summer of 2025, Russia might attempt to execute a large-scale breakthrough. However, the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces, the destruction of pontoons, drone strikes, and coordinated defense are already slowing down Russian plans. Russia continues its attempts to advance in the east, but is forced to improvise with logistics, engineering solutions, and even tactics for drone defense. Ukraine is successfully adapting, disrupting the pace of the offensive even at the approaches. A major offensive attempt is expected in the summer, but the Ukrainian defense remains resilient and is systematically preparing for a new wave of hostilities.